Abraham Lincoln said that it is much the duty of government to render prompt justice against itself as it is to render the same against the people. What he was saying was, we have a government comprised of prosecutors and police officers whose job it is to render justice against citizens when they violate the law. And that's what we're accustomed to. Prosecutors and police officers working together when someone has violated the law so that they may be held accountable, so that we may have peace and dignity in our state. But Lincoln reminded that no one is above the law, that those in government can also violate the law. And when that happens, it is the government's job to also render justice against those they work with. And so on May 24, 2022, when 19 children were slaughtered and 10 others were injured, Texas Rangers from all over the state came to Uvalde, Texas, investigated the crime scene, talked to witnesses, analyzed the case for up to a year. And after analyzing the case, one of the members of the government has been brought to you for justice. But ultimately, in our country, in our democracy, it is the people that decide their government. You do that by electing officials. You do that by sending letters or requests to have the law changed. And when one of the members of your government violates the law, you decide whether or not that is acceptable. Because make no mistake, the 12 of you will set the bar for law enforcement in these situations. If it's appropriate to stand outside hearing 100 shots while children are being slaughtered, that is your decision to tell the state of Texas. And by the same token, if that is not appropriate, that is not how we expect officers that are charged with the duty of protecting children to act, that will also go out from this courtroom. The judge has told you that your oath was to render a true verdict according to the law and according to the facts. He has given you the law, and it is that same law that we discussed in Vordire some 2 weeks ago. You recall we talked about this is a special statute because we're dealing with a special group of people. We're dealing with children under 15 years of age, and so we're expected to act differently when we're talking about children that are frail, can't defend themselves, 15 years old or younger. And in this law, the law of child endangerment, none of us are allowed to endanger a child. None of us can point a gun at a child, put them in danger, put them in harm's way. But there is also the protection that if you have a duty to act, you can't stand by while a child is in imminent danger. If you have a duty to protect the child, you can't stand by and allow it to happen. We talked about the people that have a duty. Parents have a statutory duty. and police officers have a statutory duty. And those two sets of people cannot fail to act when a child is in imminent danger. And so the charge in this case is that these 29 children were in danger. Not just danger, but imminent, immediate, close at hand danger. And that there was a man who had a duty to act, who failed to act. And that failure to act, he was aware or should have been aware that that placed those children in danger. But we're also very specific about it. How is it that he failed to act? He failed to act after being aware that shots are fired, being told the general location of the defendant, of the gunman, having time to respond. He failed to act by either engaging, distracting, delaying, or even attempting to do those things. And also being aware that shots were fired and being advised of the general location of the shooter and having time to act and having been trained in that active shooter training, he failed to follow his training to respond by advancing toward the shooter until after the children in 111 and 112 had been shot. That is the obligation the state has to prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt. Two other quick mentions of the law that the judge has given you that I'm afraid we may not have discussed in detail on voir dire. The first was that the defendant must engage in a voluntary act. The first was on causation. We talked about when you have child endangerment by omission, there can be two people that can be held responsible. The person that is causing the danger and the person that has a duty to prevent that danger failing to act.
Yeah, I'm just going to object to that. Sorry, at this point. There's concurrent causation is on his board. It's not in the charge.
I'm not discussing that. That just now went through that, Dr. Joseph, and I just didn't mark it off. I didn't say concurrent cause. I talked about what we talked about in the law that.
Okay. All right, I'll overrule the objection. Go ahead. Ladies and gentlemen, I just noticed the clerk brought to my attention, we were working on that charge yesterday. Your date's wrong on that, it's 21. It's January 21, the last page of it. So it says 20, but it's 21. You know that. Go ahead.
The second issue is voluntary. The defendant must engage in a voluntary act. That's as opposed to an involuntary act. An involuntary act, I believe we talked about during jury selection, is, if you stumble and knock somebody over an embankment and they're injured, that wasn't a voluntary act on your part. A gust of wind blows you into somebody. You're not responsible for that kind of conduct. If somebody swerves into oncoming traffic and hurts somebody, that certainly looks like you should be responsible for that conduct. But what if it was the very first time you'd experienced a heart attack and you lost control of the vehicle? That's not a voluntary act. That's an involuntary act. You're not responsible for that. But if you make a decision to seek cover and ask for cover as opposed to going in and stand by while people are being injured and killed, that is the kind of thing that's the voluntary act that is defined in the statute. And finally, on mental states, there were 4. Intentional is not really something to discuss. Nobody believed that Adrian Gonzales meant for this to happen, wanted this to happen. But the other 3 deals with their level of awareness. Knowingly means simply you're aware that by standing by, it's reasonably certain the children will be in danger. Aware is reasonably certain. Reckless is 1 degree lower than that, and that is not that you're reasonably certain the conduct will happen, but reasonably certain that there is a risk, a substantial and unjustifiable risk that the children will be in danger. But there's still an awareness. But in addition to that, there's criminal negligence, in which the law is simply, you should have been aware, based on all those circumstances, that by you failing to act, the child was at risk. So that's the mental state. Not that he intended it, wanted it to happen, but at minimum, he should have been aware that by standing there, hearing 100 shots, he should have been aware that children were in danger by his failure to act. And so then we move into, and beyond the law, into what the state's case was. And it's pretty straightforward. This is not the order we put it in, but this is just the order I drew it up, because training is a big part of who Adrian Gonzales was. And you have the training that he trained others, because that tells you what he knows. And it also tells you a lot about what the state has done before you got here. In that lesson plan that was introduced into evidence, it tells you that amidst active shooting, the state of Texas stepped forward and required active shooter training for school police officers. And that active shooter training includes stop the killing, stop the dying. And it's not terribly complicated. The training is go to the gunman, advance toward the shots. Pretty straightforward. Not complicated, not hard. Go to where the gunfire is. That's what the training is. We brought you evidence that Adrian Gonzales taught the class that said, advance to the gunman, stop the killing, stop the dying. Even if you're the only one there, solo entry, you've got an obligation to go in. Why? Because in our state we have a priority of life. Innocent civilians, their priority of safety is above the police officers. The officer going through this training is aware that the safety of the innocent is above the safety of the police officer. And in Adrian Gonzales' training, he says, the citizens have a right to expect that. And if you're not willing to do it as a first responder, find another career. Adrian Gonzales is teaching his fellow officers, take your job seriously. It's okay to move aside. It's okay if you're not up to that. Let somebody else step in that is up to it. Because as citizens, we have the right to expect that. When we call for help, we have the right to expect somebody that is put on the badge and put on the gun and put protect and serve on the side of their car will do that when we call. Because if they're not willing to do that, where are you? What are you left with when you're in danger? Who do you call? And so Adrian Gonzales, armed with this training, the next thing we spent a considerable amount of time on was the shot count. The casings along the west side, the casings along the hallway, the casings in 111, the casings in 112. And why did we spend all of the time on that? Because it's the state's position that each shot was notice to Adrian Gonzales to advance toward the gunfire. Each shot was important to those 19 children and those 10 survivors. Each shot. But the shot count, also as we did that, and obviously if you have this kind of slaughter, there's going to be blood, and we apologize for that. But the blood also tells you a story of children engaged in this, doing as they were trained. To hide in the dark, remain quiet, and wait for the police. Did the defendant have time to act? We brought you videos, the funeral home videos, as well as the hallway videos, as well as dispatch, to tell you what he was aware of, when he was aware of it, and what was going on as he stood outside the fourth grade wing for 3.5 minutes before he made his first move, before he moved forward. We also brought you the defendant's statement. And the defendant's statement, I think, clears up almost the entire case. That is what he told the Texas Rangers shortly after this happened. If you're worried about whether or not he had notice and whether he had time to act and what his decision making was, listen to these words from Adrian Gonzales. He's over there. He's over there. He's wearing black. I say where? I hear shots going off. Hear sounds coming from behind the building. I get on the radio and say, shots fired at Rob's school, and give the location and where he is. Trying to get from the front of my vehicle to the back of my vehicle. There's only a tree and a building. She tells me he's over there. She's pointing, saying he's over there. He's dressed in black. I say where? She says the teacher's parking lot. I want to say I saw a black car at the end, and then I hear the rounds going off. When Melody Flores says he's over there, the teacher's parking lot, I hear the rounds going off. Some evidence of auditory exclusion. He tells the Rangers, as Melody Flores is telling him where he is, he hears the rounds going off. She goes, he's over there by the teacher's parking lot. Then I hear the sounds going off. I heard 7 to 9 shots while I was inside the building. The coach said parking lot in all black. That's when I heard the rounds start going off. I never saw him. I never went to the school until I got coverage over here. Then I made entry. I heard like 3 or 4 gunfire. When Pargus was the first one I saw, I told him to come to me for cover because he has a bigger unit. But he deterred and went to the other area. I knew there were kids in the class. That's why we didn't fire and hit the kids. I'm responding because they are saying the guy is running to the school. I didn't respond to the accident. That's a PD traffic. I'm going over there because they are saying the guy is going to the school and has a gun. Yeah, that's why I'm going to the school. And so the question is, if Melody Flores is telling him where he is, he's in black, When did she tell him that? Do you really suppose that someone who risked her life to go tell the kids to get inside the door, that is that worried about those children, that turns to run, that when the police officer gets there, doesn't immediately say what she told you she said? He's over there, he's in the parking lot. Where? And she points. And then says, we've got to get in there. And isn't that consistent with what human beings do? Look at Gilbert Lamons. When he sees children in danger, just as Melody Flores sees kids in danger, what does he start saying? Get in there, get in there, get in there, get in there, get in there. Repeats it over and over and over again because of the urgency of the children being in danger. And Adrian Gonzales decides to go to the back of his car, call Mariano Pargas because he's got a bigger unit, and says, I'm not going in until I get covered. We proved to you the children were in danger. And I know that was a horrible thing to have to experience. But each one of those children deserves to be revived. And you needed to know that those 60 shots in rooms 111 and 112 before Adrian Gonzales entered, those shots ended those kids' lives. This was over before he went in. A whole lot of blame for a whole lot of officers. This was over while he stood outside. And we anticipated that the defendant would say, I was confused, regardless of what he said in his statement. And so, certainly gunfire can be a confusing thing. But we brought you teachers that experienced that gunfire. And the teachers told you that experiencing that gunfire, they still put their kids first and they follow their training. Kids first, follow the training. Melody Flores did it. Miss Deming in room 104 did it. Miss Ogburn in 102 did it. Miss Robin did it with her children. And Mercedes Salas said, not till I get my kids out. You can talk about confusion, but their priorities were where they needed to be. Children first. And then we talk about the defendant's evidence, or the defendant's case, let me say. We started very early on that Monday, but he didn't have time because it was too far. It was 45 seconds over there. So we brought you evidence that somebody that covered that almost that same distance was able to do it at a jog in about 11 seconds. It was further than that, given 15, 18 seconds, but it certainly wasn't 45 seconds. And then there was the representation. There were no shots fired toward Melody Flores. There's no evidence of that. And so we brought you the evidence of the eight casings on the side of the parking lot, the shot into room 24. Well, those 8 shots were accidental discharge by a man bent on killing kids. He just made an accident, swung his gun around, and fired those shots, not toward Melody Flores, but toward that window. And so we brought you the casings. One picture shows 3 of the casings, but you remember The FBI agent said we had to go back several times, and so there's 2 more markers that are additional. There's 5 casings. There's 5 shots in the glass and 5 shots directly across up into the, not 5, but shots shrapnel up into the ceiling and down into the floor. So where are those 8 casings being fired? If we have those 5 taken care of, as well as in one room 104. Well, we have room 24. And so they tell you, well, that could have come out of room 111. So we brought you evidence that it was circular or almost oblong, saying that's the wrong angle. But more important than that, there's a piece of conduit running up the building. That bullet would have to pass through without leaving a mark. That evidence about Melody doesn't know what she's talking about is so you don't trust Melody Flores. And if you have any hesitancy on Melody Flores, go back to the defendant's statement where he says she told me where he was, what he was wearing, and then I heard the shots. We had a lot of information about slicing a pie and how long that must take. No way you have time. You've got to get over to the side of the building and slice the pie. You can't do it quick. You have to do it slowly so you don't put yourself in harm's way. There's no evidence Adrian Gonzales got to a point where he could slice the pie. And we had evidence from their expert that said, slice the pie, how about taking a quick peek? You have cover, you have concealment, the gunman can't see you, you just peek around from a safe position. Well, it wasn't really cover. Well, it's not cover from the south side if the gunman's over there. Adrian can see that way. It's not cover from the west side if the gunman's over there. He's not over there, which Adrian can see. But it is cover from the northwest side, where the gunman is firing 16 shots, while Melody Flores is telling me he's over there. Echo. Adrian did tell the Rangers that there was an echo. So from his spot where he's standing, he's got to find out where that shot's coming from, and he can see. On the east side, it's not coming there. He can see on the south side, it's not coming there. He can see on all directions except behind the building where Melody Flores is telling him he is. That's where it's coming. Not only that, but when Coronado runs up and he hears those shots within 2 seconds, he's saying, shots fired, get in the building. And Adrian Gonzales knows which building to go to. And Paige knows which building to go to. And they go to the building where the shots are fired and have been firing for 3.5 minutes. Well, let's talk about the doors, the responsibility of the doors. The doors would have slowed him up. Yes, the doors would have slowed him up. He had an AR rifle that penetrates glass. The glass is right next to the doors. He could have weakened that glass within a matter of seconds. It would have slowed him up 2 or 3 seconds to go through that door. You look at rooms 111 and 112 and you see the shots there surrounded around the window. May have slowed him up another couple of seconds if the door is locked. But we're not talking about a couple of seconds. We're talking about 3.5 minutes. Number one. Number two, The charge of endangering a child means you have to be aware the child is in imminent danger when you fail to act. And that failing to act, failing to lock the doors, did not happen as the gunman was firing the guns. The children weren't in imminent danger, immediate, close at hand danger when those doors weren't locked. Their failure to act at that point was not at the point where the children were in imminent danger, nor is there evidence they have a statutory duty to act. And in this case, let me say, there are adults we can be very disappointed in. There can be police officers we're very disappointed in. I don't know how you feel about everybody, all those people. I'm not proud. This is the case of the state of Texas versus Adrian Gonzales and the facts against him. And is he going to be held accountable for his lack of action? And so we concentrated our case on the facts against Adrian Gonzales. It's radio dispatch's fault because they didn't give significant enough information. They just said, wreck, man with gun, shots fired. They didn't say if he was shooting at the school or not. That's important information we should have known. But their expert got on the stand and said, wreck, man with a gun, what does that say? Not a lot. A man can be with a gun, but not be all that dangerous. But what about shots fired? His testimony was, then it gets real. What does that mean to a police officer, shots fired? Then it gets real. Then on your way over there, you got time to know I'm facing somebody where there's shots fired. It reduces the confusion by the preparation. Shots fired. This is real. I've been trained. Shots fired at a school. Not the information in the school. Shots fired. Rob Elementary, man with a gun. I've been trained. I may have to go in solo. It was the police administration's fault because they didn't assign a person to each school. I suppose that statement is really, if they had assigned somebody, as long as it wasn't Adrian Gonzales, the outcome would have been different. The defendant's case, then we move to the other police officers, Page, Hill, Sauceda, Coronado. And I'll ask you to look through your court's charge and find where it says, evaluate the conduct of Page, Hill, Sauceda, or Coronado. You're here to decide one case. But we're glad to talk to you about these officers. Page, the funeral home tape alone shows you that he shows up 2.5 to 3 minutes after Adrian Gonzales is there. That, along with the raw videotape, shows you that he entered the building within 30 seconds. He shows up, there's shots going on, he assesses the situation in 30 seconds. He's acting. He's acting. Not failing to act. Hill, you recall that it's Hill's responsibility because he was called to Old Carrizo Road. He goes to Old Carrizo Road. He arrives there after the gunman is already inside the school. After the 16 shots from outside have already been fired. On the other side of the school. The testimony was there was radio chat about setting up a perimeter. So he sets up a perimeter. Because here's what officers do. They get dispatched and they act. And when they get there, they assess a new set of information and they act. And after he sets up the perimeter, then he joins other people. And yes, the testimony was 25 minutes before he goes in. But Ruby Gonzales told you that once those hallways get full, it can become dangerous to overclutter that hallway, so you find other things to do. Well, if there's a perimeter, doesn't that count for Adrian too? If Adrian got the call to set up a perimeter and he goes there, so be it. But then you gather additional information. And that is 16 shots being fired outside, 24 shots being fired in the hallway, 60 shots being fired in classrooms, and a teacher saying, he's over there, you got to get him. And you respond after you get the additional information. Salcedo shows up 30 seconds after the gunman has started shooting. The gunman shooting into the glass, into the classrooms. That's before Salcedo gets there. And halfway up, you know it's when Salcedo gets there because the bag is dropped. And then shots are fired. 6 shots are fired from behind a long row of cars. You're talking about him having an instant in which the gunman we know is hurrying the last part of that trip. We know the gunman is not firing into the building at that point. He's firing somewhere else. They think they're taking shots. If it's behind the vehicles, there's school classrooms with glass windows. If it's to the south and west, there's a man in dark blue or black. Permission to fire. Being careful. And then getting in his car and acting and following his sergeant to the end of the corner where Coronado says, I believe that's Salcedo. Also jogging to find the gunman. He's acting. And Coronado arrived to the sound of, he said he was receiving gunfire. The man at the funeral home is telling him, I think he says 2 or 3 the building. He's the officer that came that is used to these being bailouts, and maybe it's a road rage, and that's what he's used to doing, whereas a school officer is used to protecting the school grounds. And so he's thinking this is a road rage, and the guy's shooting at us because he doesn't want us to get him. So he goes around to cut him off. But in going around to cut him off, he's acting. He's acting to stop the shooter. You may not like his decision. You may not be proud of his decision. But he's acting. This is a failure to act case. And you know that he's acting because he jogs. He's looking for the gunman. And when he hears shots fired, he acts within 2 seconds. Get in the building, shots fired, and he goes in. He acts. And then the defense brought you evidence of the challenges that Adrian was facing. We start with tunnel vision. That's the whole issue about whether or not Adrian Gonzales saw the gunman in the parking lot. We have no trouble with the concept that he had tunnel vision and focused on the lady in peach. This charge does not start with Adrian Gonzales arriving at Robb Elementary. The charge starts specifically with, after hearing shots fired, after Melody Flores, witness number one, which you can conclude now is Melody Flores, told him the general location of the shooter, and then having time to act. That's when the case starts. So he has tunnel vision. Okay. Auditory exclusion. Perhaps he didn't hear the shots. Now, why would you tell the Rangers when Melody Flores told me where he was, I heard the shots? How does that happen? This was really complicated. Complicated set of facts I have to decide on. Complication, the training is you hear shots, you go to the gunfire. He heard shots and Melody Flores was pointing where to go to the gunfire. There's nothing complicated about that. He's wearing black. He's over in the teacher's parking lot. Go to the gunfire. Perimeter. Why doesn't Adrian get to set up a perimeter if Hill gets to? Why didn't Adrian tell the Rangers? I heard I was supposed to set up a perimeter. That's why I set up a perimeter. That isn't what he said. He said, I waited for cover before I was going in. And finally, this is an issue of stress. And this is my closing remark. I'm sure you're tired of listening to me. That was a dark day. For 29 families, it was extremely dark, and they still await justice. And I can't let that darkness. But I can say this, there were some bright spots. In that stress, teachers put their kids first. In that stress, kids made ways to try to defend each other. In that stress, kids comforted teachers. In that stress, kids came first. Adrian Gonzales had a duty to put the kids first. And he called for cover.
Proceed, Your Honor.
Yes, sir, please.
The monster who hurt those kids is dead. That monster is dead. And we told you from the beginning. And it is one of the worst things that ever happened. And I told you, the first time I stood up here and talked to you, I told you that you were not going to be the same person when you come out of this. And nor should you be. Nor should any of us. Witnessing horror, the tragedy, the loss, it's immeasurable. It's immeasurable. It's unthinkable. That loss is unthinkable. Their loss, it's unthinkable for any of us. You know, I told you guys that I have a 4-year-old and 1-year-old. And, you know, we told you we're from San Antonio. And obviously, I want to go back and see him on the weekends after the first week. I went back. The first thing I did was my 4-year-old came downstairs and I hugged him. Right? And hugged him. And started crying. And his hair, trying to, so he doesn't see it. He said, "Are you sad, Daddy?" I said, "No, I'm happy that I'm holding you." Because I know what a privilege, doing this case, I know what a privilege it is to hold that child. I do. Right? I know, I can just imagine what it's like to not be able to do that. And I can imagine the pain, and I can imagine the anger. I can imagine wanting to put somebody in that chair because I can't put the monster that did that to my child in that chair. I can imagine that. And I can imagine putting pressure. And I can imagine them responding to the pressure. And I can imagine them putting him in that chair. Him and only him. In that chair. To try to pay for the pain. To try to somehow this can cover the immeasurable and the immense loss. And so after I saw him on Friday, we have to come back here that Sunday after the first week. And Gary, he comes and picks me up. That's kind of what we've been doing. And my son comes out and he says, "Are you going to go help that man?" And that's what we told him is the reason I'm not there. And I said, "Yeah, I'm going to go help that man." Adrian Gonzales. Because he needs my help. He needs our help. Because the government, the power of the state, has decided that he has to pay for the failures of that day, for the mistakes that were made that day, and for all the pain that they feel. And it's not right. Because the person that they plucked out and put in that chair, that person showed, we showed throughout this trial, that person was acting. He was acting. He was trying. And what I hear from the prosecutor, what I hear from the state, and what you've heard this entire time, what you've heard is that they will massage all the facts, they'll twist them all into a pretzel. That every one of these officers is fine, he's not. They'll twist it. Well, look who acted. They acted. Well, Adrian acted. Well, he didn't act the right way. They acted. Well, they didn't act the right way. Well, yeah, but he didn't act the right way, and he didn't know exactly what was going on, and he remained. Well, yeah, but Adrian remained in the hallway. Adrian remained in the hallway after he got shot at. Well, yeah, he remained in danger at that point, but before that point he remained, and he didn't know what was going on. Every fact that they've tried to bring, they've twisted it around. I'm going to show you. You're going to watch. I'm going to show you what they've done to twist this thing from the beginning to the end. But ultimately, what we're talking about is we're talking about duty, we're talking about burden, and all of those things. And I don't want one thing that I'm saying right now to make you believe that he doesn't believe that he has a duty to stop something that he knows is going on. Of course he does. He knows that. He was trying to do it. He started trying to do his duty. You look at some of these other people, no. They're not trying to do their duty. They're trying to stay back. And one of the things that the prosecutor said, he said, "What you do here will tell law enforcement, give them how they respond." I'll tell you what, I agree with that, but not in the way that he's saying it. Because the way he wants you to believe it is what your verdict says is that next time, these officers will make the right choice, the right decision. They will respond appropriately. They will be perfect. But the problem is that the issues here are not that Adrian failed to respond. They're not that he was intending not to engage. So you're not going to fix any of that. Because I'll tell you, and I kind of hope it never happens again. I think we all know that it probably will. But those officers, what your verdict says is not going to make them perfect the next time. It's not going to make them not make mistakes. It's not going to make them not interpret things differently, strangely, weirdly, based on their own experiences. That's not what it's going to do. But I'll tell you what it would do. If you convict them, they're all going to be Randy Hill on that perimeter. There's nobody going in. What did he do? He went in. You convict him, what does it tell all the police officers? It's going to tell them, I'm not getting in that crap. I'm not getting in that chair. If I see somebody running towards the school, I'm not going after them, because if I'm mistaken and it takes me to the other side of the building from where the shooter is, and then I can't understand or know where the shooter is, I can go to prison. I can get prosecuted. So what you tell police officers is don't go in, don't react, don't respond, stay on the perimeter, because Randy Hill isn't sitting in that chair. He's not. Adrian Gonzales is here. Randy Hill is not. None of those officers are in that chair. That's what you're going to tell them. You're going to tell them, don't do it. And you can't tell them that. It's like, I agree with them. You can't tell them that. We cannot have law enforcement feel that way. Feel like if they're not perfect, if they don't make a perfect decision, and that's where they go. Their family goes right there. There's nothing that's going to bring these kids back. There's nothing ever is going to solve that pain. Nothing, not that. Because one of the things that Bill said to you is, he said, those kids deserve to be remembered, and they do. That you do not honor their memory by doing an injustice in their name. You don't. That does not honor those children. By doing an injustice, by doing what they want you to do, by letting him massage the facts, by letting the pretzel go all the way around and miss everybody else, but keeps going right back to him, because that's what they need. We talk about the charge. If I can get it up. The duty. So remember this about what the court has read to you. And remember, I'm not saying he doesn't have a duty. Of course he does. But just like every officer, just like the officers in San Antonio, they all had the duty. But that's, and it may have sounded flippant when we compared it. We said, look, you're in San Antonio. You hear there's a school shooting, right? You didn't stop it. Well, no, because it's not happening in the presence. And the reason we're asking that question is because the law is specific about it. A person, they have a duty to prevent an offense against a person about to be committed in his presence. So the first thing you have to figure out is that in his presence? You know, and the judge told you, you know, you use common meanings, but he is here, and he never, they're not even disputing, he never saw the shooter, ever. He is never in the presence of the shooter. Now what Bill may say is, well, he didn't go to the presence. But that's not what this law says. Law doesn't say you have to go and find yourself and make yourself be in the presence, and I'm not trying to make any excuse about that. But the law is the law is the law. This isn't about you have to go seek it out and make it happen in your presence. The law is saying if it's happening right there, there's a duty. Of course there is. He was doing his duty. He was running to the danger. He was driving right in there. If that was the gunman, and God, I wish it was, he would have ran right over him. That's what he was doing. He's going 50 miles an hour at that person. Now, what I'm glad is he didn't run the person over because he realized it's Melody Flores. He realized it's a coach is what he thought, teacher's aide. But he realized who it was after it's already too late, but he's here. And from this point, that shooter is never in his presence, ever. There's never a time. The only time that he gets close is when he goes, one of the first 5 people to go up that hallway. That is a hallway of death. Anyone going into that hallway knows, anyone knows, any police officer knows, that those rifle rounds start coming that way as they're coming up the hallway, it's death. They don't have any equipment. They don't have anything to block it. It's death. He went in that hallway of death. See, and I thought about it, because, you know, there's no way I can tell you about how they feel. But I thought about it as a parent. As a parent with kids there, if I knew that while my kid was in that classroom, somebody was going up that hallway, risking death to try to get to him, I'd appreciate it. I would. I mean, they're not perfect. But the person who did it, the monster, is dead. But he went up. A lot of people there didn't. A lot of people didn't enter that building until it was the room was surrounded on all sides by officers with rifles. Not one person on the side that he went in had one. Not one person had an AR. Not one person had a rifle. And they went in. Donald Page went in. Coronado went in. Chief Arredondo went in. Those people all went in and risked certain death. And the only time that he could have even been close to being in the presence of the shooter is when the shooter shot at him and Page through the wall. And you heard that testimony that there's gunshots going through the wall that they have to back up because not only can they not get to the door at all, they cannot get to the door. Joe Vasquez told you, that door, you're going to die at the door. You will die at the door. And I know that what the prosecution's saying is you should. Your job is to die at the door. But there was a lot of people out there. And if that's the training, die at the door, then everybody out there didn't follow it. Everybody out there waited until there was shield. Everybody out there, Joe Vasquez included. Everybody. And you remember what Joe said. He said, thought his daughter could be in there. And he still waits 50 minutes for shields, for a plan, for BORTAC. So that's what I'm saying. They're twisting it around and they're saying, well, his job, every shot was noticed that Adrian had to go in and be the person to die at the door. To be the person that tried to breach, solo entry with nothing. But nobody else did that. So is that the training? Right? Like that's one of the things that you have the right to go, because that's count 2, disregarding his training. Is that the training? Because if that is the training, and all these officers have been trained, and not one of them does it, but only one of them sits there, right? Like you have to twist it every time. For every fact has to be twisted around. That no other officer, I'm assuming, they made a point. Everybody's trained an active shooter. But that's why we pointed out that, well, now it's become a barricaded subject. And that training's different than active shooter. Now, some people are treating it like a hostage situation. And that's different than active shooter. And so the point is with this training was never meant to be twisted and used like this. You think that anybody that's put it on police training is going, yeah, and if you don't follow this, you're going to prison? That's not what they're doing. They're trying to give the best possible tactics and strategies to get to the best possible outcome. That's the point. But go back to the duty. If you find right there, honestly, he was never in the shooter's presence. Never was in his presence. Because that law, do not let them argue that law means that he has to go put himself in the presence. That law says it has to be in his presence. That's what that says. And if that's there, and you say that wasn't in his presence, then it doesn't apply. Under 605, he has a duty to prevent the threat, to do injury, if within his power. So they have to prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt that it's within his power. Because what they're not talking about is, no, this is saying you have the duty to go and follow the gunfire. That's not what this says. It doesn't say you have a duty to follow the gunfire. What it says is if it's within his power. So all of the officers before the breach, all the officers that even, and I don't have anything bad to say about Joe Vasquez. That man went in there. He went in there and he was willing to put his life on the line. But going in there like that in that room, it's not a whole lot different than going up that hallway, the first people to go up there, without any protection, without any rifle-rated anything, without any fire, without any rifles, without anything. But what that's telling you is that the reason that they waited is because it was within none of their power to get in that room. It was within none of their power to do that. It was not within his power to get in there and stop it, and it was not within any of those other guys until they got the right equipment. And then they went in, and it was within their power. But if they haven't proven you beyond a reasonable doubt that Adrian could have done something to prevent, if beyond a reasonable doubt, then that doesn't apply. And then, of course, the education code just says he protects the safety and welfare of people in his jurisdiction. Well, of course. But that's not a duty. I don't even understand why it's there. It's not a duty to say, well, yes, and if you violate it, you go to prison. If you violate it, you're a convicted felon. If you violate it, you're going to be on trial. That's just telling police officers, and especially those who work at schools, that your duty is to do that. Of course it is. That's your job. Of course it is. But what we're talking about is we're talking about a man who is trying to do that. He is not trying to do that. He's not going, I'm not protecting anybody. Oh, shooter. And then drive off the other way. He doesn't drive around the building. He doesn't drive away from the gunfire. He's still trying to figure this out, because we're talking about 1 minute and 48 seconds under their indictment. He keeps saying 3 minutes, but it's 1 minute and 48 seconds. I showed you this in voir dire. When we talk about beyond a reasonable doubt, possibly, probably, guilt likely, strong belief. If you have a strong belief that he had a duty, it's not guilty. Right there. That's why I'm talking about duty first, because as the prosecutor explained, if there's not a duty, then there's not. And not one of this is to be interpreted as me saying that he doesn't have a duty. We all have a duty to each other. He's a police officer, and he's going to do what he can. But when we're talking about criminal charges, if you even get to, well, it's likely that he does have that duty. It's likely that it was within his power. It's likely that it was within his presence. I have a strong belief it was in his presence. I have a strong belief that it was within his power. That's not guilty. It's a verdict of not guilty right there. That's the first consideration. But going to the indictment, after hearing gunshots and after being advised of the general location of the shooter, and Nico's going to talk to you a lot more about this, like, it's convenient the way they're twisting it. It's convenient the way they're saying, well, of course, he was advised. She told him, 1, 2, 3, and told him exactly where it was, and she pointed over, she's over here, pointed over there, and he knew. That's how they're presenting it to you. But that's not how we know that that's not how it happened. We know, we have to know, because she is frantic. She is very unclear about a lot of things. And so if you have a reasonable doubt that he was advised of the general location of the shooter, that's not guilty. If you have a reasonable doubt that he had time to respond to the shooter, clicker slow on the uptake. Right, having time to respond to the shooter. If you have a reasonable doubt as to that, it's not guilty. Right, because what we established, even now when he's reading Adrian's statement, shots fired, or she told me where it was, shots fired, I radioed it out. He's compressing time in his interview. We're going to talk about that. He's compressing that time. The way he's telling it, she tells him, and then he communicates it on the radio. We know that that's not what happened. We know that from the time of shots fired to the time he communicates it on the radio is a longer period of time, which is accounted for by the fact that he is trying to get the information out of her. Once he does, he communicates it. Once he communicates it, we told you, it's a second after this monster's already gotten in. Not an unlocked door, but it's already gotten in that door. When he communicates this out, the guy's already there. So having time to respond. Once he finally figures out what it is, does he have time to respond? And if he does respond, we were showing you, if he does respond over here, he's responding to something that's not even there anymore. He's doing basically what Coronado does, which is go completely away from where they saw him go in and go all the way around the building. So if there's a reasonable doubt as to having time to respond, that's not guilty. Any reasonable doubt as to any of these things, these are all elements that they have to prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt. And if there's any reasonable doubt as to any of these things, if there's a reasonable doubt as to Melody Flores and what she said, that doesn't say anything about her. That woman was traumatized. Of course she's going to be confused. Of course she's going to say it's a handgun when it's a rifle. Of course she's going to describe a completely different police car. Of course she's going to do those things because she's traumatized. But the reason we point those things out is they want him to be perfect, but they have to be perfect. They have to convince you perfectly, almost, beyond a reasonable doubt of their evidence. And that evidence rests on what did Melody Flores say and when did she say it? And they did not prove that. They did not prove it because even when she testified, and Nico's going to go over it, she agreed that she was not just saying clearly, hi, this is what's happening, and this is where it is. She was saying a lot of different things. And it goes back to that chart. Anywhere you are, if you're suspected, if he's possibly guilty, if he's probably guilty, I told you, Bordier, most people get convicted at that probably. Because jurors go, well, he's probably guilty, so they convict him. But that's not what the standard is. That's not what the law says. The law says it has to be beyond a reasonable doubt. It's the only way that our Constitution works. It's the only way our system of justice works. Now let's talk about this. Let's talk about Ranger Hill. Look at this. I froze it on his animation that he did. Right at the point that Adrian's passing that spot. And that's where he has the shooter. He says it's approximate. Well, guess what? Approximate's not beyond a reasonable doubt. Their whole case is based on approximate guesses, speculation. We don't know. We're just really mad and we're upset that we have to put somebody here. Somebody's got to go in that chair because the guy who actually did this thing, the monster who did this, cannot go in that chair. He's dead. And good riddance. Good riddance. The devastation and the destruction he causes, unlike almost anything that has happened to us as a country, as a people, and definitely in the state of Texas. The devastation that he caused. Children that young and that many. Good riddance. But that's not him. But they have to have somebody. So what do? They give you an animation that looks like that. Which, as we know, we had to bring a witness. We had to bring Claudia to tell you and to show you. Look, you'll see him. He's walking right there. And you see him walking in between those cars, and he stays there. Now, in a few seconds, you're going to see Adrian's car drive by. His head kind of popped down when it happens. He's going right there. You see the white car is flashing right through. That's Adrian driving by him between the cars. So what would an honest rendition of what you just saw, what Claudia testified, what does an honest rendition of that look like? It looks like that. That's what that animation should have looked like. Because we have actual proof. And Ranger Hill can't act like he didn't know that existed. He told you about the puff of smoke. That's the same video he's looking at. He knows that this guy's between the cars. But he told y'all, they sponsored it, that he was here. Why are they doing that? Because they're willing to twist things. They're willing to twist things for you guys in order for you to do their bidding. But those kids aren't honored by an injustice in their name. It's not honored by a conviction in their name.
And traced the window going out into 111. Melody Flores is still urging Adrian Gonzales to go in. She sees the shot come through the window. Adrian Gonzales tells the police that she's the shot go through the window. Adrian Gonzales gets on the radio and says, guys, I think he's made it in the building.
See, that's what they told you at the beginning. They told you that Adrian Gonzales got on the radio and said, guys, I think he's made it in the building. Why are they telling you that? Because they want you to believe that he had that knowledge early, that he knew that he was in the building. What else did he say? In the opening statement to you, that Melody Flores saw the gunshot go through the window. When she testified, she said, I didn't see that. Why is it important? It's because Coronado radioed. Coronado, we've talked about it. And I feel like it keeps going into a memory hole every time it goes back over here. Right here, Coronado says, guys, I think he made it in the building. He established that. He said, he's the guy on the radio. He's the guy that thinks. Even Ranger Hill said, Coronado is the one who said that. Why did he say that? Because these three saw him do it. Because these three had line of sight. And he's radioing that around. And one thing we were clear to point out is that a gunshot did go off at the exact same time as that transmission. Why is that important? Because we don't know who heard that or who didn't. We don't know who heard Coronado go out and say that he's in the building. But we know that Coronado knew that or said that. And so that's the knowledge he has when he's driving around. Why is that important? Because prosecution, what have they tried to make you think? Coronado knew immediately that the gunshot fire was coming from the building. Coronado knew immediately that. Look at Coronado. He knew it immediately. Of course he did. He saw him go to the building on the side. He knew it from here. Once he came around here.
Object to that. That's not admitted into evidence. There's no evidence that Coronado saw the shooter. There's no testimony of that or anything like that. So now he's misstating facts to the jury.
Okay, once again, ladies and gentlemen, what the lawyers say is not evidence. If the evidence, based upon your recollection, differs, rely on your own. You may proceed.
Well, and I can understand why they're trying to fight against that. Because look, this is, what I'm saying is we know that he radioed, I think he's in the building. When he's on this side of the building going to the other side, we know why. He testified, I thought he was going through the building, which implies that he knows that he went in to the building. But they keep fighting against that because this, knowing that he's gone into the building on this side, all their training, what does it say? Go to the gunfire. Even Ranger Hill they're twisting everything. They're twisting it all around. Ranger Hill said, well, yes, going to the gunfire is going all the way around here to the other side of the building, from where you saw him enter and from where you heard and saw him shooting into the building. So going That to them is going to the gunfire. That to them is following their training, exactly how they're supposed to. That to them is working to distract, delay, all the things they've charged him with. Well, they're not charged because they did that, even though they watched this happen. Had to have. And then Mike Witzkel. Now, I thought this was interesting. Mike Witzkel, I mean, he's an interesting guy. He said, I'm here as an expert witness in training, right? He didn't have any opinion. This is the interesting thing. The state had every opportunity to have Mike Witzkel go, I trained this guy. And I've seen all this stuff that you've given. And I reviewed all of these things. And Adrian Gonzales did not follow the training that I had. They had every opportunity to do that. And they didn't. They didn't ask him. He said, I didn't review anything. I don't have any opinion about whether or not Adrian Gonzales followed his training. In fact, you don't have any opinion at all. You don't have any real statement from anybody about whether or not he followed his training. And the things that you have from the officers are always with a caveat. Yes, you run to the gunfire if you know where it's coming from. If you don't know where it's coming from, you take cover and assess until you know where it is coming from. That's the first thing. You run towards the gunfire if you know where it's coming from. You look at their active shooter trainings. All the active shooter trainings involve them seeing the shooter and then going after the shooter, which makes sense. But they are prosecuting a person that they will have to admit, and they have admitted, and they've stipulated and never contested that Adrian never saw the shooter. I mean, he talked about the death by PowerPoint. In Adrian's 40-hour class that they were talking about, the 40-hour class he took, he said, look, we do 75-25, the practical versus the death by PowerPoint. I'll point out that, and you'll see that in the training that the prosecution mentioned about, Adrian taught a training. He facilitated a training. He did. There was somebody else who wrote the materials. There was somebody else who did it. And that's really what they kind of do. They have to facilitate for each other so that they can get their training hours. But in these trainings that are happening, in the trainings that are going on, all of the trainings are training them to come in, have a rifle, come in, go in and be prepared to come in and do those things, and mainly to come in and see the shooter. Mainly to come in and know where the shots and the shooter is happening. And what they have done is they have just said, well, we don't care. Yeah, he said he didn't know where the shooter was. We don't believe him. We believe everybody else. Everybody else gets a pass. Everybody else. Randy Hill gets a pass. Saucedo gets a pass. Well, yeah. Saucedo said, I think I see him, permission to shoot. We don't believe he said that. Or if he did say that, he had kids behind him, so he shouldn't shoot. That's crazy. That's crazy. Talking about this backdrop, that's crazy. And if that's the case, these officers are being overtrained on backdrop, because you do not fail to shoot a mass murderer of children because there's a backdrop where you could potentially shoot a child. You don't do that. You have to take that shot. And so if that's what they're saying, well, no, Saucedo has a reason why, because there's this backdrop. But then we pointed out, well, if Adrian did what they were asking him to do and came around here, we know now that by the time he transmitted, the guy's in the school, so he would have come around and nobody would be there. Thank you. But even if he came around and somebody was there, shooting back here, that's his backdrop too. But nope, not for him. No excuse we make for every other person there applies to him. And I think that there's something fundamental in each one of us. I think it's fundamental in each one of you that that's not fair. I think it's fundamental that that's not how justice is supposed to be done. It's not. It is not fair. It's not how justice is done, that they can do that and interpret every fact against him, but for everybody else, similarly situated or better situated. He agrees it takes 10,000 hours of practice to reach expertise. I mean, these are not experts. Adrian is not a SWAT expert. He is not an active shooter expert, right? He is doing the best he can, and this was obviously the worst situation of his or any of their law enforcement lives. 5 minutes to dress like one, 5 years to be one. I mean, the training is so extensive, and it's much, much more than Mike Witzkel gave 40 hours on that day. And then they talk about, well, you stop the killing, stop the dying. They never tell you how in these trainings. They never say how. They never say, how do you do it if it's just you and a gun and they have a rifle and you're in an open field. They don't say how. They just say do it. Go in, win the game. Now, this is what in his instructor course, CME does not endorse nor encourage going it alone. See, what I'm saying is that these are sending mixed messages to the people who are being trained. They're reading this. They're seeing it. And then when you're talking about beyond a reasonable doubt on count 2, did he follow his training? It's like, even in the training, they're telling you, well, you should go in, but we don't endorse, we don't encourage it. Because having greater numbers significantly improves a first responder's odds for success. Now, what does that mean, odds for success? Because what they keep saying is that there's a continuum of life scale, and there's a priority of life scale, right? And then proof success. This is not saying odds for success meaning odds that I stay alive as an officer. Odds for success in being able to protect civilians. Odds for success in being able to actually do this. Because if you try to just run in and you don't have any of that, that shooter, remember the shield comes in when they finally came in, pop, 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 he's putting it right on the shield. The guy in the back of the stick, he comes in, shot in the head. That guy was ready. And anybody who approached that door was dead at the door. They were dead at that door. So what they're saying is the numbers improve the first responders' odds for success in saving lives, because a dead police officer is protecting no one. And that's what his training says. That's the person they brought you to say what his training was. That's what the training says. So they're sending mixed messages to these officers, and then if you better read the mixed message the right way, or the way they want you to read it, otherwise you're in this chair. It's not right. We saw the training pictures. This is how they're training to respond to active shooter. You got 2 people, you got rifles, they're coming in together, they're coming in different ways. That's how they're training. But that's not how it was. And we said in those hundreds of pictures, they didn't bring you one picture where they're coming in with all they got is a gun. All they got is a handgun. Not one in the hundreds that they took at that training. Because they're training these officers to have the right equipment. And Adrian didn't, because the school district didn't buy it. Bailouts. We talked about it. Why is it important? Because everybody is responding strangely to this thing because of this red. They all think, they're going, well, it's okay that Coronado and them thought, well, this guy's running through the school because it's a bailout. He's just trying to get away from us. But it's not okay that Adrian thought that could happen. It's not okay if Adrian's standing here going, well, these guys are here and I'm here and I don't know where these shots are coming from, but he's probably trying to go here. I still have a whole school down here. It's not okay if Adrian thought bailout, no, he didn't follow his training. What Adrian said, he cooperated every time. Remember, this was a day later. And you know he's experiencing time compression. You know he's doing that. Because he's saying, I hear the shots, she's telling me I radio it out. That's not how it happened. So he's going through the same problems that we've talked about in all the other witnesses having to recount and recall what happened. He's having that same issue. He drove to the danger. And Nick will talk more about it. And then hindsight bias. And here's the thing that they keep trying to get him on. They go, because hindsight bias for Adrian is, when he's telling the story about what happened, he says, yes, it was a female, it was a coach. Because he now knows that that's the truth. At the time, though, he did not know that. At the time, he didn't think it was a woman. He thought it was the shooter at the time. But when he's telling the story, he's now telling it in a way, using the knowledge that he has, and he's explaining the story. And the same thing goes for when he's talking about what Melody Flores told him. When he's talking about what he understood, he did eventually understand what she was communicating and communicated it out. But in hindsight bias, he's not going through with the ranger, and the ranger's not asking, was she clear about it? Did you know beyond a reasonable doubt when you got out of the car that she said that he's over there and you knew exactly where it was? He didn't follow up with any of that. So what Adrian's doing at the time of interview is he's skipping all that stuff. And he's getting to, I figured out what she was trying to say, and I communicated it out on the radio. He skipped it all because nobody's asking him. Because when they interviewed him, they're not prosecuting him. They don't think he did anything wrong. Nobody does. Nobody does. Until years later, after all of this, they had somebody's got to go in that chair. So, ultimately, it's the same thing I said from the beginning. You know, I told my kid, and so I'm here, I'm helping this man. But I can't be the only one, and Nico can't be the only one, and Gary can't be the only one. He needs your help too. Y'all are all citizens, and he needs you. He needs you to look at these facts as you have. And y'all have been very attentive. And y'all have had to see very horrible, horrible things and hear horrible things. A lot of those things didn't have anything to do with those 3 minutes. Why did they bring it? You know why they brought it. You know why they tried to do it. The horror can make you so angry with him that you convict him. It played on your emotions. They presented all that in front of them. They're trying to do all of that, but they're not really going to what Adrian was experiencing and thinking and feeling on that day. But the one thing you do know, he went up that hallway. The one thing you do know, he went after somebody he thought was the gunman. That man didn't just stand by. He acted, except they just ignore all of his actions because they're trying to pretzel it, massage it, get it in there, do anything that they can to get the conviction. It's the most horrible thing, one of the most horrible things ever. One of the most horrible things that's ever happened in this state. But those kids are not served. The memory of those children, that I agree should be honored, is not honored by an injustice in their name. It's not. And so we're asking you to find him not guilty.
I think what we're all struggling with is how could one person do such a horrific and evil act to those children? And it's real. I mean, we're all thinking it. We're not immune from it. Everyone's thinking that. And the issue is that generates emotion. This has been an emotional trial. I can only imagine what it is to the families, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. I know it's been emotional for you. We've been watching you, rightfully so. It's been emotional to you. It's been emotional to us as well. Do you not think that burly man, when he goes home and he gave you that story about his son, that he's not digging his face in his chest, weeping? I have permission to say this because he did. Weeping. Do you not think that Gary, when he's doing FaceTime with his twins, that he stays on a little bit longer or lets them call past their bedtime so he can talk to them, never knowing if that's that last time? Do you not think that Michelle doesn't rush home to go to her granddaughter's games? Because she does. It's emotional for all of us. Or Joseph, and he gets away and disappears at the house that we're staying in because he wants to talk to his children, making sure they're okay. I shared with you in jury selection the journey my parents went on and my family went on with the murder of my brother in our driveway. Do you not think that when I close my eyes that I don't rethink picking up my mom off the ground in our driveway, loading my brother's body on the gurney after they finished the investigation and helping my pop wash off my brother's blood in our driveway? There's nothing like a mama's cry. Nothing like a mom's cry. You can't explain it. Nothing compares to it. And that's real. And we don't ignore that. It's never been us against the family. It's never been Adrian against the family. It's been a pursuit for truth. Remember the totality of the circumstances? It's a pursuit for truth. And because this has been so emotional, the only way that can be dealt with in a justice system is through a jury trial. I love a jury trial. I love the justice system. Thomas Jefferson, as we talked about in jury selection, we talked about Thomas Jefferson. This has a little bit of a delay. I consider trial by jury as the only anchor ever yet imagined by man, by which the government can be held to the principles of its Constitution. One of our founding fathers believed that. I do. In a system of the people, by the people, and for the people, you're the equalizer. You're the one that has the final say. With all due respect to the judge, who I respect very much, not him, not the bailiffs, not the government for sure, not even the defense, it's you. It's the people. And that's why I love a jury trial. And it deals with the emotion. It's the only way to balance this emotion and reason. And I say this respectfully as I can. They're trying to hijack your emotion to circumvent your reason. That's what they're trying to do. That they're your emotions, but they're being hijacked. And we know that. So how do you deal with that? Because in a world where we don't agree on anything, we definitely don't agree on politics. We don't agree on worldview and religion. We don't agree on definitions. Most people agree, no matter where you're at, most people agree that we don't want innocent people convicted and punished. Most people agree on that. And the only way we do that is through the justice system. And the representative of that is Lady Justice. She represents the justice system. Not Lady Liberty, it's Lady Justice. And this comes back from the Greek times, the Roman times, where there was a polytheistic society and there was Greek gods, and she was the god. I don't believe in Greek gods or goddesses, but she was the goddess of order. The justice system is supposed to bring order. to a society. And everything means something on this symbol, right? The blindfold means something. She doesn't look at politics. She doesn't look on whether you're a Hindu or Buddhist or Islamic or atheist or agnostic or that I'm a Christian. She doesn't look at any of that stuff. What she does is she tries to get the facts and the law and merge them together to reach this elusive concept called justice. The sword. The sword represents strength. The justice system has to be strong. There's something called the death penalty and life imprisonment. That's in the justice system. So the justice system should have a sword aspect to it. And then her foot's on a book, because you have to have a command of the law, right? You have to know the law and have a commandment to dispense it properly. And her foot is on the book as she controls the law. And regardless of your religion or your worldview, the universal symbol of a serpent is evil. And the justice system should smash out evil in a society, true evil in a society. But yet she has those scales. And these scales are important. These scales say, I don't care about those cameras. These scales say, I don't care about the false narrative that's been out there. These scales say, I don't care about all the resources of the government. The scales even say, it doesn't even matter what the judge thinks. The scales says is we have to balance all that out, look at everything, and come find this concept called justice. And I love it. I love her. I loved her when I was a DA myself in Bexar County, as we talked about, when I made death penalty decisions. When Jason and I were prosecuting murders, I loved it. I love it as a defense attorney, sitting at that table, either defending people innocent like Adrian of an allegation by the government with all the resources. I love it. And in a world that has this dichotomy and this battle, the justice system brings us all together with a blindfold, not made of mesh, and not lifted up when it's convenient. It stays on the whole time. And so this is the point, though. This is the point in a trial, in a jury trial. This is the point in our justice system, where Lady Justice takes the scales and she hands them to you. And now you have them. And that's what we're arguing to you. And that's what we've presented to you. And so all of this gets me to a point of where I'm in a dilemma. Let me tell you what my dilemma is. My dilemma is that I'm a passionate person, if you haven't noticed. And my passion, I think, can be a strength, but can also be a weakness. And so I wonder to myself, if I look like I haven't slept, it's because I haven't. Did I do too much? Was I too passionate? Was I too aggressive? Or did I not do enough? Did I not ask the right questions? Should I have gone even harder? And I struggle with that. But my dilemma is I can't apologize for it. And I won't be fake. And I won't tell you something that I don't believe. I haven't done that since jury selection. I won't start now. And so I can't apologize for it. And because I can't apologize for it, all I can do is ask you for grace. Just extend some grace to me. So if I've done anything, if Jason's done anything, if Gary's done anything to offend you, please, you don't have to now, please hold it against me or Jason or Gary, not against Adrian, okay? So that's what I'm asking you to do for us. And so we have to look at things, because what came up during the trial, and at the beginning when I told you, is there was a concept called totality of the circumstances, right? This case, ultimately, we're going to consider everything, allegedly. We want you to consider everything. But this case boils down, truly, to 1 minute and 48 seconds. Not 3.5 minutes, not 77 minutes, to 1 minute and 48 seconds. And it came up during the trial. And so Jason talked to, how do we know that? I'm not making that up. I'm going to their charging document. I'm going to their instrument that they charged Adrian. It goes up until after the shooter entered the room, 111 and 112. Until the active shooter shot at one or more, one child or children in rooms 111. So until it's from when it's from showed up at this, it's from as the shooters, it's from, and until that shooter goes into those rooms and does what he did to those children. So we have times on that. That's what I'm saying. We have times. We know. Remember this? It's over here, but we took a picture of it. So Adrian parks. It's not contested. Adrian parks at 11:31:55. He parks. We'll talk about what he was responding to and how other people responded and how Adrian responded as he's going to what he thought was the danger. And we'll talk about shots fired. That's true. He calls shots fired because he hears them himself. But he parks at 11:31:55. He's not at 11:31:55 knows what's going on. At 11:31:55, he doesn't have a full concept of what's happening. He just parks at 11:31:55. And the shooter enters the building at 11:32:58. That's a minute and 3 seconds. And then some time goes by, 22 seconds later, he's shooting at those doors, and then 20 seconds later, he's in. If you add it all up, it's a minute and 48 seconds. That's what their indictment says. It's not 3.5 minutes. It's a minute and 48 seconds. Parked, enter the building. That's it. And then there's 22 seconds later, and then he enters again. 11:33:43. This is when he enters room 111. This is where we get the extra 45 seconds, and that's why I say a minute and 48 seconds. I'm going by facts that you've heard. They're charging, and no one's making things up on our side, okay? I don't know what happened there. Give me 1 second. It held down on purpose.
Yeah, just back it.
I'm trying. Give me 1 second, guys. Okay. Okay, so here's what the government wants you to compare Adrian's actions to others. So let's do that. And that's all we were doing during the trial. We were asking questions. We got permission. I mean, Mr. Espinosa sat to your right, and then Mr. Starbeck over your right shoulder, sir. And we asked everybody permission. For where you were sitting, Mr. Peña was between you two. And we remember in jury selection, we talked about that. And we got permission from you to be able to ask tough questions. Even about sensitive matters. We did. And everyone said yes. So let's compare some actions. We're going to compare the actions of Mendoza, Saucedo, Coronado, and eventually Hill. And yes, they could figure that out during trial, so of course we're going to talk about it. So just to lay the ground, you guys know this already. So here's an aerial view. We can't even see Adrian's car. He's so much to the southeast side. But Coronado, Mendoza, Saucedo are on this side, a little bit outside. You've seen this picture multiple times. This is the scene. Here's a better view. We can see Adrian's car way over here. He's driving into the eye of the storm. Many witnesses said that. He drove all the way to the back. And then we had those 3 officers still at the corner. Here's the west door, and here's where the shooter was shooting. We have evidence of that, and then he enters this door at 11:32:48. So let's compare. Adrian and Officer Mendoza. Adrian drove into danger. Officer Mendoza stayed away at the perimeter. Adrian had no line of sight, not contested. Christina's not going to come up here and tell you that he had line of sight. Mendoza was the same side. He was on the same side as the shooter. Adrian was alone. Mendoza had backup. Adrian was one of the first 5 in the building. Remember, we're going to talk about that first 5. Because Joe Vasquez and others talked about that first 5 and what they did and what they potentially prevented. Mendoza enters the east door at 11. The east door, even though he's on the west side, the east door at 11:42:48. But before that, he drives away, not towards the gunfire. When he's facing the door, when he's looking, when he has backup, and someone has an AR-15, we're going to talk about Saucedo next. He drives away, not towards the gunfire. Remember that pretzel that Jason's talking about? There's one of them. Let's do some more comparisons because they're going to compare Adrian to everybody else. Adrian and Officer Saucedo. Adrian drove into danger. Officer Saucedo stayed away at the perimeter. Adrian, no line of sight. Saucedo saw the shooter, and we're going to look at the video in a second, and asked to shoot. Adrian, alone. Saucedo, God bless you, has backup. Adrian has a handgun only. Saucedo has an AR-15 rifle. Adrian, one of the first 5 in the building. Saucedo never goes in the building. After having line of sight, opportunity and ability to do something, and he doesn't. He never goes in the building. And he also drives away, not towards the gunfire. But let's look at this. This is the dashboard of Coronado. Here's the sergeant. Mendoza's here. They set up perimeter. They're acting as if they're being shot at, but there's no evidence. There's no defects. There's no objective evidence they got shot at. Here's Saucedo. There's a long rifle. Watch his behavior. Watch him aim. And watch him do this point. He's there. He's there. There he is. He had aimed him. He's pointing at him. He's there. And then they saw him walk into the building, so they leave. We're coming back to this video.
There's no evidence that's a misstatement of the facts, Your Honor.
No, it's not,
Again, I'm
Judge.
going to object, 'cause I want it on the record that he's misstating facts to the jury.
Okay, once again, ladies and gentlemen, what they say in argument's not evidence. If it differs from your own recollection, rely on your own. You may proceed.
It's in evidence, guys. I asked questions. I was very specific about questions. I gave people opportunities to talk. I wasn't trying to be a bulldog on anybody. Maybe you can think I was on Ranger Hill, and we'll talk about that in a second. But we're just asking. We were just asking questions, specific questions, not general ones. Okay. So let's talk about Officer Coronado, Sergeant Coronado. Adrian drove into danger. Sarge stayed away at the perimeter. Adrian, no line of sight. Sarge, same side as the shooter. Adrian, alone. Coronado has backup. Adrian, frantic witness he was dealing with. Coronado, frantic witness he was dealing with Claudia. Remember that? We're gonna look at the video again, and you'll see it. Adrian, unfortunately, and again, we're not ragging on her, okay? You saw me cross her. But she was wrong, and we'll talk about so many things that she was inaccurate about. A frantic witness that was wrong and inaccurate because she was on the wrong side of this issue. But the frantic witness, Claudia, the sergeant, on the same side, was accurate. Because you know why? Because she said, he went in the building. He went in the building. And you see the video yourself that they're acting like they knew he went in the building. Because you don't go from this, thinking you're being shot at, to this unless you know that the danger's gone and they're in the building. You saw the video yourself, and we're going to watch it again. Sergeant Coronado unfortunately drives away, not towards the gunfire. So now we're going to watch it again, but now we're going to focus on Sergeant Coronado, okay? This is him again. We already looked at Saucedo's behavior. Look who he's talking to. He's yelling at somebody. That's Claudia. You go inside. Okay. What? They're talking. She testified. I told them he went in the building. And guess what? He acts like he knew he went in the building. Because you don't go from ducking like that to watch his car drive off. Watch all of them. They all know he went in the building. They don't believe what they're trying to prosecute. There's no way. Our defense is not, well, if you're going to prosecute Adrian and prosecute other people, they don't believe it themselves. You can't. I'm going to go through a list in a little while of all the things that they're going to have to, Christina, with all due respect, is going to have to come up here and tell you to ignore to get to the man at the bottom of the totem pole. I'm going to show you that list, and I'll be right, humbly, but I'll be right. Where's Randy Hill? I know it bothers them, because he's the one dispatched. Why didn't they call him? Why didn't they call Saucedo? So we can ask them questions and bring you answers. The government has all the resources, all the rangers, this whole road. They have the whole government of Texas and all the resources to bring you evidence. And we expect that of them. Where's Randy Hill? Where's Mendoza? Where's Saucedo? None of them. The only reason why they brought Coronado is because they wanted that video in. He's dispatched at 11:29:36, 3 minutes before the shooter enters into the building. What was 911 told? That is another aspect of the bill, and Bill's right. I mean, he could hear. He's an intelligent man, and tremendous respect for him. But he heard our questions. I mean, that's a factor. If we're looking at the totality, what were they told? What information did they all have? Someone shooting a gun. This is what Mr. Limon is told, dispatch. They just shot at us. He's shooting at the school. That wasn't relayed to anybody. He's jumping into the schoolyard. Wasn't relayed to anybody. He's just jumped over the fence. Still wasn't relayed to anybody. He's running towards the school. Nobody knew that, but that nobody knew that includes Adrian. That includes Adrian. He's wearing black. No one knew that. That would have been helpful to know. But we know for sure, and I know Ranger Hill's here. He can come sit right here if he wants to. I asked him, you don't know, I know when he showed up on the scene. You do? It wasn't in your critical timeline. Well, it's in a different timeline that he gave to them, didn't give to us. Interesting. But so in his critical timeline that he didn't review for 3 years before he sat in front of you and testified to this, he said that that's all that's in his critical timeline. Not when Randy Hill supposedly showed up, because Randy Hill didn't check in at location. Let me know what's going on. Nothing. No communication. So all we have in the first critical timeline is this. Randy Hill at 11:33:32. Just standing there. Setting up. Did you hear? Did you hear how difficult it was for him to try to make up an excuse for what Randy Hill's behavior was? Did you hear how difficult it was? Because you couldn't objectively do it. Not based on Nico standards or Jason standards, just training standards, tactics. I asked him tactical questions. How does this make sense? Well, he was just there momentarily. Where's that? I don't understand where you're getting this from. What we know for sure is that Sergeant Coronado is driving around the school, and there's Randy Hill. He's already out of his car. He's been there for a little while. I don't know how much it is. The ranger thought he knew. I don't know how. But there he is, setting up perimeter. When nobody's asked him to set up perimeter. Oh, they said there's a dispatch, again, that we didn't get. From an unknown person. Remember that exchange? Figure it out.
I'm going to object. This is misleading the jury, and he's having them believe that we did not turn over everything to him, and it's
Okay.
objection.
Remember that exchange? I was just asking questions based off the evidence that we were looking at. I let him, what are you looking at, so I can ask you about what you have in front of you. There was no trick question, no gotcha. I told him I'm not going to question your character, but I will question your opinions. I'm going to question your investigation. He knew that. He knew that. He's coming before you after 3 years of all of this and the resources. 3 years, and that's what they brought you? That's the mortar to their case, Ranger Hill? Bringing it all together in his critical timeline? Well, where's Randy Hill? We all want to hear from Randy Hill. And then we have a hero. A true hero. Joe Vasquez. You heard about Joe. I mean, he gave me permission to call him Joe. He called me whatever he wants to, but we went through scenarios. We went through breaching. We talked about when you breach an outward swinging door versus inward swinging door. Well, what did Joe tell us? At 11:56:28, he linked up with Lieutenant Gonzales, who briefed him. Very different when you're being briefed by fellow cops after the situation has already been assessed. Very different, but they want to conflate that to Adrian. Well, they did that. They listened to instructions. They moved in. You have 27 officers around you. Everybody has guns and helmets and vests on and AR-15s and said, here's what's going on. And oh, yeah, of course they're going to listen. That wasn't Adrian. I asked if he wanted me to make entry. He didn't do. He asked. He understands there's an order. He understands the danger of it. We talked about the danger of it and fatal funnels, and there was 2 of them. There was the hallway, and then there was the actual doorway. We talked about that. Response, no, we're trying to negotiate because we've been fired at. That's what he was told. Waited with Canales for negotiating team and the TAC team. So a true hero. I hope you like Joe, because I like Joe. I mean, he waited. There was still sporadic shooting at times. We look at the timelines, the critical timeline that's kind of complete. But he waited with Canales for the negotiation and the TAC team. Should Joe be sitting in that chair? Is Joe a coward? Are Board TAC a coward? Are all the other officers cowards? Eventually, Board TAC showed up. It was a bit of a blur. He doesn't remember. A lot was going on. Then they had a planning. They planned the entry. How long did you wait there? I asked them that. They entered at 12:50:01, almost an hour after he arrived. So Joe Vasquez is a real hero. He thought his daughter was in there. Could have been in there because she went to school there. But he still waited an hour because he knows there's a pecking order. He knows there's a way. He understands fatal funnels. He said you're going to die at the door. That's what he said. We got that from Joe, not from us. And he waited because they were planning entry. Part of their training too. Waited 50 minutes, over 50 minutes. But Board TAC was rehearsing and opening the door. And again, I'm not saying that's good or bad. That's what part of their training, because an open, outward swinging doors is difficult and it's dangerous. But they had the equipment at that time. Adrian didn't. The first 5 didn't. Taking cover is reasonable. Then we asked them about Adrian's behavior, because they didn't bring an expert, so we had to ask somebody, and we're going to ask somebody who's in law enforcement. Well, taking cover is reasonable if you don't know where the shots are coming from. From Joe, their witness. Containment. Remember I asked about containment? We talked about that. And he said, if those first 5 officers, we call them the first 5, if the first 5 hadn't contained the shooter, he could have done the same thing to the whole school. Think about that. When he didn't contain, he didn't do anything to distract or detain or to impede, that first 5 group held them in 111 and 112. And let me submit to you humbly, if it wasn't for that first 5, that person responsible, because I know I've called him an animal and I know I've called him a monster because he is. You know, you get the point. But if it wasn't for that first 5, what would have stopped him from finishing off those precious babies in 112? Was it a distraction? He knew there was talking, there's negotiating, he waiting for them. He wants to be a cop killer too. I mean, he wants to be a cop killer, so he's distracted. He's done damage he's done what he's done in 111. He did what he did in 112. But what would have stopped him to finish everybody off? The 5 outside, knowing that they could breach at any time. He doesn't know what they're doing. And he was waiting in that closet. He knows that closet, remember? 111 was his home room. He was going to 111. He went to school there. 111 was his home room. He knew that room. But even Joe Vasquez said, if those first 5 hadn't contained the shooter, and by the way, and I know it bothers them, Adrian's part of that first 5. And not that 3.5 minute that Christina's going to come up and argue, that minute and 48 seconds with no line of sight. Talking to the guy on the stick. He was talking to the guy on the stick. Remember that stick is the stack when they're breaching behind the shield? He said he couldn't hear me because I realized I was wearing a gas mask. He himself was experiencing perception distortion. He didn't even realize he had a gas mask on. There was no gas, but he put it on and he couldn't hear, and he's talking. He's like, oh, wait, what am I doing with this gas mask on? And so he took it off to talk, but he didn't realize it at the time. But everybody, it's okay for everybody else except for Adrian, because he's the man on the bottom on the totem pole. He's easy pickings. Except for you guys to settle that. Now let's talk about Mel Flores. Look, I mean, if you couldn't tell that I had an affinity for her because she's a special ed teacher, then you weren't paying attention. I have a special needs son, and I told her that, and I appreciate that. And it takes a special person to spend 25 years teaching and taking care of and nurturing and stewarding special needs children. No one is attacking her character. But she came in almost 7 days after the event. She admitted she's watching these cameras and reading the stories and listening to talk, and that's human, that's normal. She wasn't given an order by the judge or anybody else not to talk to anybody, but that was influencing her talk. And so, but she's witness 1. She's in their indictment. The training and then witness 1, based off what she said. She thought the shooter had a handgun. She was sure of it, but he didn't have a handgun. Did not see the windows break on the east side of the building. I could not see from where I was, but Bill, in opening statements, expected you to say that she did. Why? Because that puts Adrian in a disadvantaged position. But then the truth came out during cross-examination, right? Remember we talked about that in jury selection? The greatest vehicle ever invented to find the truth, I was taught, is cross-examination. It's in Proverbs as well. Because we had to, and we asked you, and I told you that direct examination for the government was going to be like a waltz, and then cross-examination was going to be like a dental visit, pulling teeth, and I think you saw that. It wasn't our intent. We can't control the way the witnesses respond, but some of them were very honest. State Exhibit 921 identifies the wrong PD vehicle. She identified the wrong PD vehicle. She identified Sergeant Page's vehicle. She ID'd Donald Page. Khaki pants, Adrian didn't have khaki pants on. Full beard, Adrian didn't have a full beard. You saw the interview. Short sleeves, white short sleeve shirt. Adrian wasn't wearing white short sleeve shirt. We believe she saw Sergeant Page, but she also testified that she was frantic. Yes, I was. Let me submit to you respectfully. Again, this is nothing against Ms. Flores. God bless her. Let me submit to you that you heard the 911 call from Mr. Limones. You heard Amy Marin's 911 call. Understandably, it's frantic in the background. You heard Claudia in the background of Mr. Limones' 911 call. Ms. Flores was more like that. Adrian's dealing with that type of franticness. Understandably, again, it's not a criticism, it's just an observation. He was pacing. Remember we talked about that? Assessing because you're shouting, yes, they're shouting, south entrance, west entrance, shots fired. And we'll talk about when he transmits something in a second at 11:32:59. She was with Adrian from 2 to 7 minutes. You can't cherry pick what you want to believe from her, Christina. You just can't do that. Or you shouldn't do that. It's not right. It's not fair. I mean, so we know it couldn't have been 7 minutes because the timelines don't work out. The stuff that we do know, it couldn't have been 7 minutes. But even if it's 2 minutes, it covers the 1 minute 48 seconds that Adrian had no eyesight on the shooter. He had no opportunity. He didn't have the ability. He's with her. She's a victim / witness at the time, yelling, frantic, giving instructions. He's taking shots. He's looking around. He's taking cover. See, it's okay for everyone else to take cover but Adrian. For a minute, he can't take cover for a minute to observe, orient, decide, and then act. Remember their training? But she's going to have to come up here and tell you it's okay for Coronado, for Saucedo, and for Mendoza to take cover, and then run from the shooting, run from the gunfire. Make a note, run from the gunfire, not run to the
Your
gunfire.
Honor, I'm going to object to the sidebar comment.
Sustain.
So she's going to have to argue that to you. And I don't know how you do it in good conscience. I just don't know how you do that. But 2 to 7 minutes, it's a big deal. That's a big deal because it came out in evidence, and you should consider that. And the reason why it's in a big deal, I want to say this because I asked Ranger Hill. I said, well, why isn't that in your timeline? Why did he know that information? I go, would that have been important? And he said, yes, it would have been important. So good for you for answering that way because it's true. It would have been important for him to assess critical, important, his definition, important timeline, 2 to 7 minutes with a witness / potential victim. It matters in your assessment of someone's behavior and what they didn't do and what they were actually doing. Excuse me. Shots being fired while with Adrian Gonzales. Yes, while they're together. So now he has somebody he has to protect as well. And himself and her, and think about it. He has no idea that this person's going, he doesn't know that. There's no evidence that he knew he was going in the building. He's going in the building, Adrian. There's no evidence of that. He couldn't even see this guy. And we said pacing could be taking cover. She says, I'm sure. Said the shooter went in the south door but pointed to the west side. Yes, I did. And then in her interview, the investigator, the ranger, had to say he did not go in the south side. Oh, I really thought he did. And she was honest about it. I really thought she was mistaken. She just was inaccurate. At the time, you thought the shooter went in the south door, yes. Told him the 4th grade building. He said, what building? He doesn't even know that. He's not part of that. He's assigned to the high school. He didn't even know which building you're talking about. Yes, I just wasn't listening, she said, because there was a lot going on for her. That's understandable. Then said he's on the west side of the building. Yes. So south side entrance, west side building, yes. Dialogue between you two was 2 to 7 minutes, yes. So here we go. Adrian with her 2 to 7 minutes. Shots being fired while with Adrian, yes. You say pacing could have been taking cover, yes. Said shooter went in the south, yes. At the time you thought the shooter went in the south door, I did, yes. Told him 4th grade building, he said what building, yes. So there's confusion there. Not confusion like he's confused. He's trying to figure things out. He doesn't even know she doesn't even know where she's directing him to. And again, there's a lot going on for her. Dialogue, yes. I just wasn't listening. Now we have Ranger Nick Hill. And I'm going to temper. I'm sorry, Christina. I didn't mean to be disrespectful to you. I apologize. I'm going to temper myself. I really believe, with all due respect, Ranger, I really do believe that Thomas Jefferson was talking about someone like Ranger Hill. And I'm saying that with him in the room. I consider trial by jury, you, as the only anchor ever yet imagined by man, by which the government, including him, the government, can be held to the principles of its constitution, and one of those principles is due process. You know what due process means? It means fundamental fair play. Fundamental fair play. Everybody gets it. Remember that blindfold? It doesn't. We don't do this. Doesn't apply to you. Can apply to you. Doesn't apply to you, sir. Applies to you, ma'am. It doesn't work that way. That's not how Lady Justice operates. That's why she's so beautiful. She wears that blindfold at all time. I'm not going to go over all of Ranger Hill's testimony and our back and forth. And again, if I offended you by my question of him, please hold it against me. I can only ask you to do that and extend some grace to me. But like Jason said, this was his presentation to you, in good conscience. This was, and if you had not known any better, if we didn't ask questions, if we didn't push back, you would think that the shooter was right there and the angel just drove right by him. That's it. And then he placed the shooter where the shells were, and then we went through the whole ejection thing. Remember that? And it was at versus towards, and can you look at two people, and how many fingers am I holding up? We went through a whole bunch of stuff, and I just asking pretty simple questions. But that's how you presented it to you, and that's not the facts. Jason told you. We know that because we have some video, grainy, yes, but we have video. But more importantly, we have Claudia, who he interviewed. He didn't review someone else's interview. He interviewed her. And not only does she, but also Mr. Limones and even Amy Marin loses the shooter in between cars. He's in between cars. That's where he should have been if he was going to present that to you, this animation. But the government sponsored him anyway. Now, whether they knew or didn't realize it, I don't know. I'm not inside their minds, and that's between them. But they sponsored him anyway. So what is Christina going to come here and say to you? 3 minutes. She'll say 3.5 maybe. Okay, because Bill kind of gave you the heads up on that. Didn't follow training. Well, Jason went over the training, so I asked him a lot of questions. I talked about tactics with him. He was a very, very nice man. He agreed. Just my opinion. I'm one opinion of many. There's different. These are suggestions. And I said, I understand. Thank you, sir. Very respectful. Didn't follow training. Then we showed you the training. We don't recommend going in alone. But we're not even saying Adrian made that conscious decision, by the way. We're talking about 1 minute 48 seconds. Had an opportunity, best opportunity. I mean, Ranger Hill, over the 3 in the corner, said that Adrian had a better opportunity to stop that shooter than Coronado, Saucedo, and Mendoza. You're the judge of the credibility. That's why you're here. That's why I love the jury section, the jury trial. And here's what they're going to do. They didn't say it, but they're saying it. They're trying to feed you a coward sandwich. They want you to eat a big coward sandwich and say that Adrian's the one that gave it to you. The problem is, it is wrapped around 2 slices of bread of bravery. That's the problem. You have this coward sandwich, but you have bravery and bravery around it. The bravery of driving into trouble, thinking there was a shooter. Only one, didn't set up perimeter, goes into the trouble, into the eye of the storm. And then he's one of the first 5 that goes in the building. Takes rounds, what Martinez does, takes rounds, and you saw the video. Adrian has his weapon out. He doesn't move. Page is there. He's in the fatal funnel. All that shooter needed to do was turn this way and start shooting at them. He didn't run away. He only went outside when his radio didn't break, because the radios don't work inside of schools, which is interesting. And so then he had to go outside to call for SWAT, call for cover. Everybody's doing that. It's for the cover for the situation, not for him. That wasn't accurate. And then what Bill told you in opening is that Adrian, if you listen to Bill's opening, and again, this is respectfully, you would think that Adrian showed up and just stayed there and stood there. If you remember opening, I don't know if you do or don't, but that he just stood there and didn't do anything. And the evidence didn't play that out. The only thing Adrian remained in, he remained in danger. He went into the danger and remained. And once he figured things out, he went further into danger and remained. That's the only thing he remained in. And they're going to ask you to send the message. Jason couldn't help himself. He had to talk about it, and I understand. The problem is the message that will be sent is be Officer Hill. Set up perimeter, even though you're not asked to set up perimeter. Don't go in. Don't go into the eye of the storm. Don't even wait 30 minutes. Stand back. Don't do anything, because I don't want to be sitting in that chair. That's the message that will be sent. Not just to Uvalde County, but also to Nueces County, Bexar County, because people are watching. And that's the message that would be sent. That's not the message that needs to be sent. They need training. They need good training. They need proper training. They need resources. They need help from those schools to work with them in conjunction. And we'll talk about doors being locked here in a second. And all working synergistically together to protect the most precious thing we have in our community, and that's our children. No doubt about that. But to pick the man lowest on the totem pole and drag him into court and to come before you, there's a lot of things they're going to have to ask you to ignore. They're going to have to ask you to ignore inaccurate dispatch. They have to. I'm not saying it's their fault, but they're going to have to ask you to ignore it. They're going to have to ask you to ignore that Adrian drove into danger. Remember that sandwich? They're going to say, yeah, okay, the bread is fine, but the coward sandwich is full in the middle. And then, yeah, I understand the bread at the end is bravery, but we just want you to focus on what's in the middle. It's like an Oreo where you take off the up top. They want you to have the coward cream in the middle. Remained in danger. They're going to have to ask you to ignore that he remained in danger. That he had no line of sight. They're going to have to ask you to ignore that. He never had a line of sight. But other officers did, not him. They're going to have to ask you to ignore that it was truly, because I looked at the indictment and we're looking at the facts, it's truly 1 minute and 48 seconds. They're going to have to ask you to ignore that. She's going to argue something different, and give her your attention, please. They're going to have to ask you to ignore that. They're going to have to ask you to ignore Mendoza, who showed up 27, 28 seconds after Adrian. That's it. That's the difference. He was there too, before the shooter made it in, with line of sight, with backup, with guns, with superior weapons. They're going to have to ask you to ignore Salcedo. Line of sight, never goes in, drives away. You saw the video yourself on the dash cam. They're going to have to ask you to ignore Sergeant Coronado. They're going to have to ask you to ignore Randy Hill. They're going to have to ask you to ignore building doors being unlocked. Everybody, Wixel, all of them, all the Rangers said if those doors were locked, it would have made a difference. Since time is of the essence, those doors being locked would have made a difference because you had 3 officers on that side. You had 3 officers on the side, on the west side, one with an AR-15, getting instruction from Claudia. He's going in the building. They're right there. And if you would have been locked out, you don't think that would have made a difference? But they have to ask you to ignore that. I don't know what you do with the school board on that. That's not what this trial's about. But you have to ignore that. They're going to have to ask you to ignore that. But it's not that important. It's more about Adrian. The classroom door is being unlocked. I'm sorry for what Mr. Reyes went through, but that door was unlocked, and it should have been locked. That would have made a difference, a key difference. And you know what really made a difference? If that door was unlocked, and those 3 officers in the corner followed the gunfire and made it in the west door, not drive around for whatever reason. You can talk about. I want to hear the excuse. Made it, and then the shooter's in the fatal funnel. This door's locked, even if you got into the school. The classroom door's locked. And he starts shooting at the door, but then here's these 3 officers following their training, cutting the pie, getting with him, and then he's in the fatal funnel. That would have changed things. We can what if it all day long, but they're what ifing it, and they're asking you to make presumptions and speculate with Adrian. But they don't want to do it with anybody else. This is the hardest part of my job. Because I have to sit down and I can't talk anymore. It's not that I like talking, I just have a lot to say. I get it. You can ignore me, you can say I'm full of it, that's fine. You can tell me after. But because the state has, the government has this burden that Jason went over, the highest burden in our justice system, the burden that the government has to prove to take away someone's liberty and change the course of their family's lives and that person's lives. And it's a burden that we all agreed was appropriate for the government with all their resources to have. They get to go first, and they get to go last. They gave us that sandwich. They gave us the burden of proof sandwich, okay? It's the other way around. And so I have to sit down and I can't talk. And please give Christina your attention. And she's going to make arguments to you. And you're going to see me in the corner, and I'm not going to be looking at her, but it's not to be disrespectful. I want to give her a heads up. It's because I get frustrated because I want to talk, and I got an answer, and I got a question, and I have an argument. That's just my personality, for good or bad. That's just the way God wired me, okay? But I'm going to be looking down and be writing notes, and my leg's going to be going 100 miles an hour. I already know. But you can ask yourself, not just what would Nico, Jason, or Gary say, but what did the evidence show, right? And I promise you, I'm going to do my best not to object during her closing. I will try. She can do it. I'm not offended by it. I'll do my best not to object, but listen to her, okay? And we're going to ask you now, I'm asking you to apply this burden. The burden that's the highest in our justice system. The burden that says not sure is not guilty. The burden that says, no, you can't take the person from the bottom of the totem pole and move them up and ignore all these things. You can't ask me to ignore all those things. Government, you can't. You can't ask me to ignore all those things and apply this high burden. The judge told you in the charge that if you have a doubt and it's reasonable, one doubt, and it's reasonable, it's a not guilty. Just one doubt. Did they eliminate every doubt from your mind? I hope that's not the standard. If it did, then I'll deal with it. It'll be horrible, but I'll deal with it. But that would shock me. Because that can't be the standard. That can't be the standard. That can't be the message. Because she's going to come up and say, send a message. Well, but send a message also to the government. Send a message that, like Bill said in his closing, so we concentrated our case on the facts around Adrian Gonzales. Send a message you can't do that. You can't pick and choose. You've been given authority to steward well. People in our community say, steward this well, government. It's a huge responsibility. This is not how you steward it well. And if you apply the burden by law, if you buy the facts objectively, if you can acknowledge 2 things at one time, if you can acknowledge that families have been destroyed, because she's going to make an emotional plea to you. Everyone's cried, and you'll probably cry again. It doesn't take away something that my family's gone through or what they've gone through. If you apply them objectively and do what our founding fathers expected juries to do, we're asking you now, and we're hoping that you'll pick a 4-man or 4-person, 4-woman, and do a quick verdict, and a quick verdict of not guilty. Because the evidence has shown he's not guilty, folks. Thank you, and God bless you.
State.
Thank you, Judge. I just wanted to, just a quick note that the judge is going to decide the punishment. I think that was made clear to y'all, but I don't know if it was confusing here with the closing statement. So I guess I'll kind of address quickly the idea that I bowed to political pressure. There's no evidence in this case that I bowed to political pressure. And I think if you remember in the opening statements, the defense talked about all these third-party investigations that went on in the opening. And the easiest thing would have been me to do what all those did, which is say, don't blame us, blame somebody else, or everybody's to blame, therefore you can't hold anybody responsible. That would have been the easiest thing. So, you know, I've never bowed to political pressure. And that's not what this case is about. The defendant, in their opening statement, they talked to you about, and they did here in the closing, that he was not assigned to the school. He relayed information. He drove to the school. He went into the building. He called for SWAT. He stood perimeter. He evacuated students. He had no shields. He checked on another officer. He got the building plans. He secured a master key. And there was even testimony during the trial that he evacuated students, and wasn't that a good thing? A good thing. And he relayed information over the radio, and wasn't that a good thing? Ladies and gentlemen, this is not about doing a good thing. I am not standing in front of you. In this case, it's not been about handing out participation trophies. That's not what this case is about. This case is about, and it's always been about, holding officers to the duty that's mandated for them in the law. Mr. Turner and I, as prosecutors, we have these big books that we're supposed to follow, and the laws and all that, and he described to you that there's a special law in these books. One special law with regard to children. And that's what this case is about. All of this, the personal attacks, all of that was an attempt to justify the unjustifiable, in my mind. We're not talking about people being perfect. We're not talking about pretzels. And I'm not here to send mixed messages. I'm here to say that when you are a peace officer for a school district and you raise your right hand and say, I am going to be a peace officer, I'm going to do my job, that you're going to be held responsible. You're going to be held to that duty. You know, when we had the active shooter training that was brought in, that active shooter training goes through all the mass shootings of schools back to Columbine. At the time that the Robb shooting happened, we've had, 23 years of mass shootings. And school districts have begun their own law enforcement police force. That's saying, we're not just going to depend on the local police department, we're not going to depend on the sheriff's office. This school district, the Uvalde Independent School District, we are going to have our own police force. So what does that mean? That means these buildings, they are their homes. Those hallways, there are their roads. Those students in those classrooms, those are their people to protect. Even Mr. Gonzales, the defendant, says that in his video recorded statement to the Rangers. He says, it was a car wreck, but that's not my responsibility, that's the local PD's responsibility. But when I heard that there was a gunman and he was near the school and entering the school, that's when I got in and went. Because that's his jurisdiction. That school district. That's his jurisdiction. Those students are his people. The charge that you have talks about the legal duty that the law enforcement is supposed to be responsible for. And then it talks about the Texas Education Code. And that's because our legislator had mandated that. And we cannot turn a blind eye to that. You know, their own expert witness talked about being in San Antonio and how he went into hot situations. Ladies and gentlemen, I would argue to you there's nothing hotter than a gunman in a school. That's pretty hot in my book. And we have training, and he said if you have training or you don't, you figure it out. This defendant had training. He even provided the training. He put on the training. The defense would have you ignore all of that, all the things that they say that he did and that he's the low man on the totem pole. No, he's not. He's the top man. He was the police officer for the school district that showed up first. And why do we go back to having school police officers since Columbine? Because on any given day, you can have a monster that makes his way into your school. On any given day. On any given day, they would have you believe that because there was a wreck outside the school, that confused me. I don't hold me responsible because, the wreck's too much, so not my day. They would have you believe that on any given day where we have bailouts in a community, bailouts happen all the time. Even in large urban areas, you have people who outrun the police. But they want you to believe that because there were bailouts on this given day, but don't hold me responsible. Not my day, not my responsibility. They would have you believe that because he wasn't assigned to that particular school on any given day, don't hold me responsible. Not my day, not my responsibility. They would have you believe that because the doors weren't locked, it's not my responsibility. On that given day, the doors weren't locked, so not my day, not my responsibility. On any given day, I only had a pistol. He had a rifle, so it's not my day, it's not my responsibility. And then they would have us tell, the argument is because you had 3 other officers show up who believed that they were being shot at. Don't hold me responsible, because on any given day, if you've got 3 other people that showed up, it's not my day, it's not my responsibility. And what strikes me so much in this case, and something that we believe the evidence has been brought to you that's going on, is the contrast in the training of the schools. If you think about it, since Columbine, the students have been taught, and you heard that, lock the door, lights out, be quiet. We are basically teaching these kids, and the kids in room 11 and room 12 were taught to practice for their impending death. You don't cry and you don't scream. But we're going to teach you what you do when a monster makes his way into the school. We're going to have you rehearse your own death. But yet, we have active shooter training that says to go to the fire that the defendant taught, but we're going to ignore that. Because on any given day, if he says, not my day, we're supposed to just look the other way. And I am sending a message, and I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself, because I want officers to know those days are over. We're not going to continue to teach children to rehearse their own death and not hold them to the training that's mandated by law. That when you hear the gunfire, you go to it. You go to the shots. You stop the dying, and you hold civilians, children, above yourself. You hold them high. They're the highest priority of life. I think it's telling, and Mr. Turner touched this with you about the defendant's statement, and if you're going to get all the evidence to go back in there. He says in that statement, the teacher, she told me He's over there, she pointed, he's over there, he's wearing all black. I think that statement is very telling because in that statement he says on 3 different occasions, I walked over there. I walked to the school. I walked. And you contrast that with Miss Flores, and what is she saying? I ran, and I tell him, we need to get in there. We need to get in there. She's not saying you go, she's saying we. Because in her mind, I believe you can infer that those kids and the protection of those kids are still tantamount to her. And there's no evidence that she had active shooter training. There's no evidence that she taught active shooter training. She was just a teacher. So are we going to continue to hold teachers and students to a higher level of responsibility than we are going to hold police officers for school districts who raise their hand and say, I will be a police officer. Those hallways will be mine. Those children are my people. Those classrooms are my houses. I will protect them. Are we going to continue to do that? No. Because on any given day, you can be like Mr. Salinas and Ms. Torres who came in and testified to you. They dropped their children off for school that day, and the next time they saw their children, it was at the hospital. Mr. Salinas told you that the child that he dropped off for school that day is not the same child he picked up. Because on any given day, a monster can make his way into an elementary school. Ms. Garcia testified that she dropped her child off for school, she went to the award ceremony, and her daughter wanted to come home with her. And she said, no, I paid $2 for that pizza party, you're going to go and have a good time. And then she never saw her daughter again. Because on any given day, that can happen. We know that. We see it. Nueces County is not any different from Uvalde County. It's just not. What happened to Uvalde on May 24th can happen anywhere at any time. And if it's going to happen, and if we have laws mandating what the responsibility of a law enforcement peace officer is for a school district, then we better be ready to back it up. You had the teachers come testify to you about what was going on. And what do we know about what the defendant had versus the children in rooms 111 and 112? The defendant had his car. It was on the corner building. He had cover. What did the children have? They had chairs and desks. Defendant had a pistol. What did the children have in rooms 111 and 112? They had unarmed teachers. The defendant had a vest on. And what did the children have in rooms 111 and 112? They had curtains to hide behind. I would also, if you get all the evidence back, that you listen to the defendant's statement. And I think it's always telling, is when that ranger asked him, why didn't you engage? Why didn't you go and approach? And the look on the defendant's face is like, not me. Really? I mean, it's like he catches himself. Because it wasn't his day. On any given day that this monster made his way to Robb Elementary, that wasn't his day. You heard a lot about the time compression, the auditory exclusion, the fatal funnel, the OODA loop, the echoing. You even heard about a fatal field. Fatal field. Because we all know on any given day there may be a fatal field. And we have to be ready. You're going to get all the evidence behind you, sent back with you, and you'll have the radio traffic, and you can look at that and decide if it's 1 minute or 3 minutes. But even a minute and 48 seconds, what he put up here, a minute and 48 seconds. I don't know if anybody just sat still for a minute and 48 seconds. That's a very long time to distract, engage, and delay. And his backdrop was right here. Was right here. All you had to do was to even attempt to distract, delay, or engage. I know this case is difficult, and it has been difficult. But we cannot continue to let children die in vain. We cannot. Nueces County is not any different from Uvalde County. We cannot let 19 children die in vain and another 10 to suffer. They're going to be that suffering for a long time. On behalf of those 19 children, I respectfully request that after your deliberations, that you return a verdict of guilty. Thank you.